how a small neighborhood dispute over a missing dog and noise turned into a heated feud involving families, gossip, and social media chaos. Never in my life I had thought that a neighborhood could feel so small until the trouble started. It began with the subtle hum of tension, just a noise complaint, really, but in our little street, that was enough to ignite a wildfire. I'm Sarah, and I've always been meticulous, the kind of person who notices everything. Every late-night sound, every misplaced object, every little disruption to my carefully ordered life. Mark, my next-door neighbor, didn't seem to notice any of that. His parties were loud, messy, and frequent, the kind that shook the walls of my house and made it impossible to sleep. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking, maybe it's just one night, he'll quiet down. But night after night, the bass thumped through my living room, rattling picture frames and testing my patience. And then there was Linda, living across the street. She had recently lost her dog, a tiny, scrappy little thing named Pippin, and she was frantic. I didn't know yet that she suspected Mark, that she would confront him with trembling fury, blaming him for something he hadn't done. I had barely introduced myself to her, but soon we would all be caught in a tangled mess of assumptions and accusations. The first confrontation happened at the mailboxes. Linda, face flushed and voice sharp, demanded, "Did you see my dog? He's missing. I know you know something, Mark." Mark leaned back casually, trying to shrug it off. "I haven't seen your dog, Linda. Calm down. It's probably just wandering around somewhere." I stepped in, trying to mediate without taking sides. Maybe we should all just take a moment to think. Accusations won't help. But it didn't help. The tension was electric. Voices were raised, hands gestured wildly, and a few neighbors passing by stopped to watch. I could feel my stomach nodding, realizing this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a spark that could turn into something much bigger. The air felt heavier that evening, charged with gossip that hadn't even started yet. What was supposed to be a minor inconvenience, a simple noise complaint and a lost pet, had already begun to weave a web that would entangle all three of us and eventually drag the whole neighborhood into chaos. That I went home that night, trying to calm my thoughts, but I knew deep down this was only the beginning. The next morning, Linda's panic had only intensified. Pippin, her little scrappy dog, was nowhere to be found. She had searched every corner of the street, called every neighbor, and even posted frantically on the local social media group. Her anxiety was palpable. I could see it when she stormed outside, checking every driveway, muttering to herself. Mark stepped out onto his porch at the same time, coffee in hand. He looked tired but relaxed. "Linda, calm down. I haven't seen your dog. Maybe he's just hiding somewhere," he said casually, his voice carrying that irritating mix of calm and indifference that Linda's eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb. Mark, your parties last night shook the whole street. You probably scared him into running off." Her voice trembled with both fear and anger. That I tried to intervene. "Guys, please, let's not jump to conclusions. We don't even know where Pippin is yet." But the words barely landed. Mark rolled his eyes and muttered, "Seriously? This is getting ridiculous." His tone only escalated Linda's frustration. She took a step closer to him, hand on her hip, clearly preparing for a confrontation. From my perspective, the whole thing was already spiraling. The block was so small that nothing stayed private. Every neighbor passing by paused, watching the tension grow like a storm cloud over our street. I felt my chest tighten. I could sense that this minor misunderstanding was about to become much bigger as Linda continued to argue. I noticed a flicker of guilt in Mark's eyes. He hadn't taken responsibility yet, but the way he avoided looking directly at her suggested he understood the stress he had caused. I realized that this wasn't just about a missing dog. It was about pride, assumptions, and the way small things could ignite a neighborhood feud by the end of the morning. Voices were louder, accusations sharper, and a few neighbors had already chimed in from their porches, offering helpful advice and opinions that only added fuel to the fire. It was clear, what started as a lost pet was now becoming a full-blown neighborhood scandal waiting to explode. By mid-afternoon, the block was buzzing. What had started as a simple missing dog and a noise complaint had morphed into a spectacle. Social media posts began circulating, exaggerating events, blaming one neighbor over another, and painting each of us in ways that were both unfair and Infuriating that I scrolled through the local neighborhood group and froze. Photos from the morning confrontation had been uploaded, complete with captions that twisted our words. Crazy neighbors fighting over a dog and noise, one post read. Another claimed Mark was reckless and careless, while Linda was labeled paranoid and hysterical. I felt my stomach twist. The misinformation was spreading faster than I could process. Mark, oblivious to some of the posts, noticed a few comments and scoffed. "Look at this drama," he said, waving his phone. But his smirk didn't hide the tension creeping into his shoulders. I could tell he felt cornered, though he would never admit it. Linda, meanwhile, had taken to posting multiple frantic updates. "Pippin is missing. Someone must know where he is. Mark, did you do something?" Her fear and frustration were palpable, but the public nature of her posts only fueled the gossip machine. Comments rolled in from neighbors who had no idea of the actual events, each trying to take sides, and suddenly, what should have been a private concern became a public drama that I felt torn. Part of me wanted to step in and clarify the truth, but another part knew that engaging directly could escalate the situation even further. Instead, I observed silently, noting how quickly assumptions and rumors could spiral into conflict. By evening, the neighborhood had split into factions. Some sympathized with Linda, some sided with Mark, and a few quietly supported me, even though I had said little. The atmosphere felt suffocating. Even simple chores outside my house now carried a risk of confrontation. It became clear. This wasn't just a minor dispute anymore. Gossip had transformed it into a multi-front conflict, dragging in every neighbor, online spectator, and passerby. And as I watched the tension ripple across the street, I realized we had reached a point of no return. Unless someone could step in to calm the storm, the next few days felt like living in a powder keg. Every interaction, every glance outside, carried the potential to ignite another argument. Sarah's voice in my head, the part always trying to mediate, reminded me that small conflicts often escalate when left unchecked, but it was already too late. Mark had decided to retaliate. After one particularly tense evening, he hosted another party, louder and more chaotic than before, right when Sarah was tending her garden. The bass rattled the windows, and the laughter of his friends echoed down the street. Sarah, fed up, immediately dialed the local authorities, her hands trembling with frustration. Linda, meanwhile, continued her social media campaign, posting emotional pleas and indirect accusations. Still no sign of Pippin. Is anyone doing their part, or is he lost forever? The comments section exploded. Neighbors who had been quietly observing now chimed in, taking sides, and adding their own evidence and assumptions that I stood in the middle of it, feeling torn between wanting to intervene and knowing that my words could be misinterpreted. "This is ridiculous," I muttered under my breath, watching the three of them escalate what should have been minor grievances. Each party, Sarah with her precision, Mark with his defiance, Linda with her panic, seemed determined to prove themselves right, regardless of the consequences. The conflict became physical in small, passive ways too. Mark's car blocked Sarah's driveway one morning, forcing her to honk loudly in frustration. Linda confronted Mark again at the mailboxes, pointing fingers and raising her voice. I tried to mediate, but the neighbors' stares and murmurs made it clear that any attempt at diplomacy would be challenging. By the end of the week, the neighborhood's atmosphere had changed completely. Casual greetings were replaced with wary glances, whispered judgments, and a constant sense of tension. The small dispute over noise and a missing pet had grown into a multi-front battle, dragging families, friends, and even casual observers into the chaos. It was exhausting just to watch, but I knew, if we didn't find a way to address it soon, this minor feud would become an all-out neighborhood war. That it didn't take long for the families to catch wind of the feud. Sarah's sister, Emily, decided to visit and immediately took a side. "You're being way too uptight, Sarah. It's just noise," she scolded, shaking her head as she surveyed the backyard chaos. Her words made Sarah bristle, her frustration now compounded by family judgment. Mark wasn't spared either. His brother, Dan, called him mid-morning. "Why are you letting them push you around? Throw your own party and show them who's boss." Mark hesitated, torn between wanting peace and wanting to assert himself. The pressure from family only made him act more stubbornly, escalating the conflict instead of defusing it. Linda's mother got involved as well. She showed up at the front of her house, arms crossed, chastising her daughter for not confronting Mark directly. "You can't just post online and hope things get solved. Go speak to him." Linda's panic spiked. She wasn't ready for that confrontation, yet felt cornered by her mother's insistence. Each family member's input acted like fuel on a fire. Advice, blame, and unsolicited strategies spread faster than the actual conflict, turning private disputes into public dramas. Suddenly, it wasn't just neighbors who were involved. It was siblings, parents, and even extended family. From my perspective, watching all this unfold was exhausting. I could feel the tension radiating down the street, the quiet moments replaced by arguments that bounced between houses, phones, and social media. Every action from one family member seemed to trigger an equal and opposite reaction from another. Evening, the neighborhood felt like a battlefield. What had started as a missing dog and a noise complaint was now a tangled web of family pressure, gossip, and personal pride. I realized that if we didn't step back and breathe, this feud could destroy more than just fences and trust. It could fracture relationships permanently. The weekend, the neighborhood drama had leaked far beyond our little block. A local online forum picked up the story, feuding neighbors over noise and missing dog. The thread exploded with comments, photos, and speculations. Every picture posted, Mark laughing on his porch, Sarah tending her garden, Linda pacing the street, was twisted into evidence for or against someone that I scrolled through the comments and felt my stomach tighten. One post read, "Mark's parties are out of control. He's terrifying the whole street." Another said, "Linda is overreacting. Typical paranoid pet owner." And worst of all, strangers were now debating our lives like a spectator sport. Mark seemed amused at first. "Look at this circus," he muttered, showing me his phone. But even he couldn't hide the subtle tension creeping into his shoulders. Every notification brought more judgment, more assumptions, and a creeping anxiety he wouldn't admit to. Linda, already panicked over Pippin, took to posting more frequent updates, each one wilder and more desperate than the last. She included hashtags, photos, and pleas for help, and it backfired. Neighbors who had previously stayed neutral now chimed in with opinions, often taking sides without understanding the full story. Even Sarah, who tried to stay composed, was pulled into the online spectacle. Friends and distant relatives began messaging her, some offering advice, others outright criticizing her behavior. The weight of judgment, both real and imagined, began pressing down on all of US. By nightfall, the block was no longer just a quiet residential street. It had become a stage, every movement scrutinized, every word dissected, every assumption amplified. Gossip had grown teeth, and suddenly, this minor dispute had the power to define reputations, friendships, and the fragile peace we once had. For the first time, I realized that the real danger wasn't just the missing dog or the noise complaints. The real danger was how quickly a small conflict could explode into something that consumed everyone involved, online and offline, leaving scars that might never fully heal. By Monday, the tension had reached a boiling point. Every word, every gesture seemed to carry hidden meaning, and misinterpretations spread like wildfire. Sarah sent Mark a formal email complaining about the weekend parties, carefully worded but firm. Mark, seeing it on his phone, interpreted the tone as aggressive and threatening. "Seriously? She's trying to pick a fight," he muttered to himself, feeling his temper flare. Linda, on the other hand, misread Mark's casual responses to her social media posts as mockery. "He's laughing at me. He thinks I'm insane," she whispered to a neighbor, her panic escalating. Each side was reacting to what they thought was true, rather than what actually happened. That I watched in disbelief as minor issues morphed into major conflicts. A simple misunderstanding about a barking dog escalated into accusations of intentional harassment. One neighbor misheard Sarah speaking on the porch and told Mark that she was calling him irresponsible, which wasn't true, but it ignited Mark's defensiveness. The social media posts didn't help. Every clarification seemed to backfire, twisting the narrative further. Friends of friends weighed in, giving opinions without context, and the online chatter intensified the real-world tension. Even innocent gestures were misread. Mark tried waving to Sarah as a peace offering, but she interpreted it as mocking. Linda's attempt to approach Mark with Pippin in tow was taken as confrontational. Every attempt at calm was twisted into proof of hostility, and the cycle fed itself, growing larger with each passing day. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had transformed into a minefield of suspicion. Walking past someone's window or chatting casually in the driveway felt like navigating a battlefield. It became clear that no one was truly communicating. Everyone was reacting to assumptions, fears, and misinterpreted words. The feud was no longer about a missing dog or noise complaints. It had become a war of perceptions, where truth was buried under layers of miscommunication and pride, and the smallest spark could ignite another explosion. The homeowners association finally called a meeting, hoping to contain the chaos. I arrived early, nervously adjusting my notes, knowing that this was the moment where months of simmering tension would either boil over or begin to settle. Mark was already there, leaning against the wall with that familiar smirk, though I could see the tight line of his jaw betraying his anxiety. Linda stormed in moments later, clutching Pippin's leash and glaring at him like he had personally orchestrated the theft of her dog. Sarah arrived last, calm but visibly tense, scanning the room as if preparing for battle. The moderator tried to set the tone. "We're here to resolve disputes calmly and respectfully," he said, voice steady but strained. "Let's allow each party to speak without interruptions." "Yeah, right," Linda launched immediately. "Mark, you've been reckless. You scare animals, you disrupt everyone's lives, and now the whole neighborhood knows about it." Her voice quivered with anger and fear. Mark fired back. "I haven't done anything. Stop blaming me for things you assume. You're overreacting, Linda." His words were defensive, sharp, and full of pride. Sarah intervened, her tone trying to mediate. "Look, we're all neighbors here. Let's talk calmly. Accusations aren't going to help anyone." But her calm voice barely reached them. The conversation spiraled. Other neighbors who had attended chimed in with their own grievances, adding fuel to the fire. Every comment, every rebuttal, seemed designed to prove someone wrong rather than find a solution. Families whispered behind hands, some cheering on, some shaking their heads in disbelief. That I felt my chest tighten, realizing how far the situation had escalated. What started as minor complaints had exploded into a full-blown confrontation where pride, fear, and gossip collided. Each person's perspective was valid, but none of us were listening. By the end of the meeting, the room was tense, unresolved, and buzzing with frustration. No one left feeling satisfied, but it was clear that the first step had been taken. The feud was now out in the open, unavoidable, and everyone had to face the consequences of months of miscommunication. After the explosive meeting, the tension on the street didn't ease. If anything, it thickened. But surprisingly, not everyone wanted to watch the feud spiral further. The retired couple from 2 houses down, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, quietly stepped in. They had seen too many neighborhood disputes end badly, and they weren't about to let this one destroy what little sense of community remained. Mrs. Thompson approached Sarah first, speaking softly. "We understand how frustrated you are, dear, but maybe there's a way to calm things down before it gets worse." Sarah nodded, relief flickering across her face. For the first time, someone seemed to understand without judgment. Mark wasn't left untouched either. Mr. Thompson, with his gentle but firm tone, said, "Son, we all see you're a good neighbor at heart. Maybe a little patience and compromise could go a long way." Mark scowled but couldn't ignore the sincerity in the old man's voice. Even Linda had someone quietly guiding her. Her elderly neighbor, who had pets herself, reminded her to breathe and consider the bigger picture. It's not about blame. It's about finding your dog and keeping peace. That's what matters. Slowly, alliances formed, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. The presence of these unexpected allies allowed each of us to pause and reconsider our actions. It didn't solve everything, but it created small cracks in the armor of tension, moments where listening became possible, where understanding began to creep in. For the first time in weeks, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps this feud, fueled by assumptions and pride, could be redirected. Maybe, just maybe, the neighborhood could remember that we were more than our conflicts. But even as small bridges began forming, The past misunderstandings and social media hysteria still loomed overhead. The challenge wasn't just reconciliation. It was learning to trust each other again. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when Linda finally got a clue that could change everything. Pippin had been spotted wandering near the park several blocks away, sniffing around a flower bed. Relief washed over her like a wave, but she hesitated. Should she tell Mark immediately? Or would this just reignite tension in front of the whole street? She decided to keep the discovery to herself for the moment, quietly following the little dog at a safe distance. Every wag of Pippin's tail was a small comfort, but Linda's mind raced with worry. If I reveal this now, will Mark take it the wrong way? Will Sarah think I'm hiding things again? Meanwhile, Mark went about his day oblivious to the discovery. He was tense, constantly on edge, still defensive from the social media backlash and the neighborhood confrontation. Each glance toward Linda made him suspicious, his mind filling in gaps with worst-case scenarios. Sarah, seeing the undercurrents, began to offer subtle support, checking in, offering quiet words of advice, and encouraging small gestures of goodwill. These little acts were unnoticed by most, but were slowly creating cracks in the wall of mistrust. That evening, Linda finally called Mark over to the park under the guise of taking a walk. She watched from a distance as Pippin trotted happily toward him, safe and unharmed. Mark's surprise softened into relief. I thought I lost him forever, he muttered, scratching behind Pippin's ears. In that small moment, the reality hit all three of us. The feud was fueled less by actual wrongdoing and more by assumptions, panic, and miscommunication. Seeing the dog safe offered a glimpse of hope, a chance to pause and reflect, and the first tangible step toward rebuilding trust. Though the neighborhood still buzzed with whispers, and the social media posts hadn't vanished entirely, a small breakthrough had been made. The story was far from over, but for the first time, the possibility of reconciliation felt real. Despite the small victory of finding Pippin, tensions on the street reached a breaking point. Minor annoyances, lingering suspicions, and weeks of pent-up frustration collided into one explosive day. It started with a misunderstanding over a misplaced trash bin. Mark, thinking Sarah had deliberately moved it, confronted her loudly on the sidewalk. "Why did you move my bin? Are you trying to provoke me?" His tone carried both anger and disbelief. Sarah, taken aback, responded defensively. "I didn't touch your bin. Stop blaming me for everything." Her voice cracked, revealing exhaustion and the emotional weight of weeks of neighborhood chaos. Linda overheard the argument while walking Pippin nearby. Misinterpreting Sarah's tone as support for Mark, she stormed over, pointing a finger at him. "This is exactly what I mean. You all ganged up on me from the start." The confrontation escalated quickly. Voices rose, neighbors emerged from their homes, and bystanders began taking sides. Phones came out, recording every word, adding another layer of public scrutiny. The air felt electric, charged with frustration, pride, and hurt. Even I, trying to mediate, struggled to find words. Every attempt at calm was drowned out by shouting, accusations, and defensive rebuttals. I realized that this was the culmination of weeks of miscommunication, the point where every small tension exploded simultaneously. By the evening, the neighborhood felt like a war zone of feelings. Relationships were strained, reputations questioned, and everyone involved was exhausted. But amid the chaos, small glimmers of understanding flickered. Subtle gestures, quiet words, and moments of genuine concern hinted that resolution was still possible if we could all step back and listen. For the first time, it was clear the feud had peaked. What happened next would determine whether the neighborhood would heal or spiral further into conflict. The morning after the peak confrontation, a strange calm settled over the street. It wasn't complete peace, but it was noticeable, a pause. In the constant tension, Sarah decided to take the first step. She baked cookies and left a small plate on Mark's porch with a note. "I hope we can start fresh. Let's try to understand each other." Mark found the gesture surprising. At first, he hesitated, unsure if it was sarcasm or genuine. But seeing the effort and thoughtfulness in Sarah's note softened something inside him. For the first time in weeks, he felt seen and acknowledged beyond the lens of conflict. Linda, too, began to change her approach. Instead of public posts and frantic accusations, she quietly checked in on Pippin's favorite spots, leaving small notes for Mark and Sarah. Thanks for helping me keep him safe. I appreciate you. These little acknowledgments didn't erase the past, but they signaled a willingness to cooperate. Even I noticed subtle shifts. Neighbors started nodding politely instead of glaring. Small conversations resumed, and minor courtesies returned. The streets didn't feel hostile anymore. They felt cautiously hopeful that IT wasn't magic, and it wasn't instant. Each kind gesture, each quiet word of understanding, acted like a thread weaving back together the fabric of a neighborhood torn apart. Slowly, the walls built by suspicion and anger began to crumble, replaced by tentative trust and shared humanity. By the end of the week, the street felt different, lighter, more forgiving. The feud hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer a looming storm. Small acts of reconciliation had planted seeds of peace, showing that even the deepest conflicts could begin to heal if approached with patience, understanding, and empathy. Weeks later, the neighborhood had finally settled into a fragile calm. The once explosive tension had faded, replaced by cautious understanding. Pippin roamed freely again, his wagging tail a small symbol of restored normalcy. Mark approached Sarah one afternoon while she tended her garden. I realize I overreacted. I let pride and anger control me, he admitted quietly. Sarah smiled, her eyes softening. We all did, but at least we're trying now. Linda, too, had shifted her perspective. Instead of posting online, she focused on direct communication and small gestures, rebuilding trust through action rather than words. The neighborhood saw a change in her, too. No more frantic accusations, just steady presence and responsible behavior at AS for the rest of us. The ordeal became a lesson in patience, empathy, and the power of small acts to mend fractured relationships. We reflected on how quickly minor misunderstandings could escalate, and how easily pride, assumptions, and gossip could fuel conflict. Looking back, I realized that the feud had been an unexpected test of character for everyone involved. It forced us to confront our own reactions, biases, and the limits of patience. Most importantly, it taught us that even in a small community, every action matters, and reconciliation is possible if people are willing to tee are wide up. By the end, the block wasn't just peaceful, it was stronger, with neighbors more aware of each other's humanity. The stolen pet, the noise complaints, and the months of miscommunication became stories we'd tell with a mix of disbelief and relief. Reminders of how close we'd come to letting pride destroy what we all valued. The feud was over, not through punishment or resentment, but through understanding, empathy, and the willingness to act with care, proving that even the deepest conflicts could heal, if only people were willing to listen and forgive.